fleeing persecution. What more will the U.S. do as the Knights of Columbus fund relief for refugees? Shine the light. We're in the air with Pope Francis and on the ground in Seoul awaiting his arrival. Miraculous rescue. A young man is alive after being trapped a full day in a collapsed building in Thailand. And another Hollywood legend loss, remembering Lauren Bacall. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, August 13th, 2014. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Pope Francis has left Rome for Seoul tonight. This is the first papal trip to Korea in nearly a quarter century. We have a team on the papal plane, and our producer Susie Pinto is on the ground in Seoul, where it's already Thursday morning. And Susie, you're up early. I'm sure everyone there preparing for a big day ahead.
Brian, Seoul is just waking up. This is a modern, bustling metropolis of over 10 million people, and there is great anticipation ahead of the Pope's trip here. There are posters and banners lining the streets and the subway stations, and I'm told that traffic has been congested in recent days in the areas where the Pope will be, and of course, security is very tight. Now, Brian, the Pope will be bringing a message of peace and reconciliation on his trip. That is a very welcome one for Koreans. Korea, of course, dealing with a lot of tragedy of late. In April, more than 300 people died when a ferry sank here, many of them children. The Pope will be meeting with families of those victims, and that, Brian, is expected to bring a great deal of consolation to the Korean people. Now, EWTN News Nightly will be bringing you reports on our program, of course, and you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So we will be bringing you every moment of this trip. That is the trip, the Pope's first trip to the Asian continent. Brian? All
right, Susie Pinto in Seoul tonight, and our Rome correspondent Alan Holdren is in flight right now with Pope Francis. It's the first time EWTN has actually been aboard the papal plane. Just before departing for Seoul today, Alan talked with us about the significance of traveling directly with Pope Francis.
So for a journalist that covers the Vatican, Brian, this is an incredible opportunity, a unique opportunity to spend an extended period of time with the Pope. There's 70 of us journalists on the flight between radio, print, and television. And for us to be there with the Pope on the flight, and then in each individual event, is really a spectacular privilege and also a responsibility to bring all of those events, all of those behind-the-scenes moments to the viewers. And this, in Pope Francis' era, is also an interesting opportunity because he comes on the papal flight, he comes back and he meets each individual journalist, at least he has on the previous flights so far, and he also gives an interview on the return flight. So that's an opportunity to ask him a question as well, Brian.
All right, Alan, this is the first papal trip to South Korea in more than 2 decades. Of course, Benedict XVI didn't make it to Asia while he was Pope. Francis making it clear to do this early in his papacy. What can we expect from these next few days, Alan?
Maybe a surprise to some, but fully 10% of South Koreans are Catholic. It's more than 5 million people, and the Pope is going there to confirm them in their faith. It's a young church. Catholic presence is there only for less than 300 years, and he's going to celebrate that youth. He's going for Asian Youth Day. There are going to be representatives from more than 30 countries there in Asia that are going to be meeting him for the closing Mass in particular on Sunday. But he's also going to celebrate the history of the church there in Korea, in its martyrs in particular. He will beatify 124 of them. So between these events, these major events, he'll also be celebrating minor events and marking other anniversaries and important occasions there. He's going to be speaking with survivors of this ferry crash, this capsized ferry last spring that killed 300 people, most of them school students. He's also going to be visiting a cemetery for aborted children. These are events that are traditional Pope Francis, that will show him and his real direct touch with the people. This is also going to be true of poor people and the handicapped there in South Korea. So these are all events that we can look forward to over the next 5 days. Brian?
All right, as Alan travels with the Pope and Susie Pinto prepares the way in Seoul, count on our exclusive Shine the Light coverage of the Pope in Korea We have stories you won't see anywhere else this week and next here on EWTN News Nightly. And in just a few minutes, Dr. Matthew Bunson joins us with his analysis of papal travel. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world, beginning with the debate over how best to help more than 1.5 million Iraqis fleeing their own homes and Islamic militants. Our Jason Calvi joins us now with more on this crisis.
Brian, the UN is calling it a level 3 emergency. That's the highest level. U.S. troops are now in Iraq to come up with a plan to rescue refugees stuck on a mountain. World leaders are scrambling.
The Islamic State has swept into northern Iraq, forcing out Christians, Yazidis, and Shiite Muslims.
We don't know what they mean by ordering us to leave. Is it because we are Shiite Muslims? I don't know.
These children now free to play in the Iraq city of Najaf, the home of this Shiite shrine. But for many here, it's not their home. At least an estimated 50,000 Shiite Muslims recently escaped from the Islamic State's control.
They killed innocent people. Some of the people fled to the mountains. They're dying. They don't have food or water.
Many Iraqis have fled without supplies to higher ground on Sinjar Mountain. The U.S. and U.K. are responding with food and water drops.
We need a plan to get these people off that mountain and get them to a place of safety.
The White House says over 100 troops are looking into options to evacuate the refugees.
There needs to be a lasting solution that gets that population to a safe space where they can receive more permanent assistance.
The recommendations could come in days. The White House says this won't be a combat mission. One of those able to escape the danger and the mountain is Jamal Jamir, part of the minority Yazidi religion. He trekked 15 hours to Syria and found his cousin.
We lost each other. Thank God they arrived.
But not all of his family is joining this reunion. For tonight, these Iraqis sleep in tents in Syria and line up for food far from home.
And France said today they'll arm the Iraqi Kurdish forces who are fighting the Islamic State. The U.S. has already been launching airstrikes against ISIL, and Pope Francis has written the head of the UN. Pope says he's placing before him the tears, suffering, and despair of the Christians and other religious minorities. He's urging the international community to take action to end this tragedy.
And thank you, Jason Calvi, as we continue our coverage of the refugees in northern Iraq. Dr. Thomas Farr, director of Georgetown University's Religious Freedom Project, is with us tonight. And Dr. Farr, the people in northern Iraq, the minorities there, are fleeing from the Islamic State, some of them fleeing to mountaintops. There's persecution, widespread persecution of Christians and other minorities. How would you say this compares to religious persecution over the centuries?
Well, you know, religious persecution in the 21st century has been getting worse since the beginning of this century. In fact, I would say for the last 20 or 30 years, we could map this and see the graph moving up. Religious persecution is the result of a number of things like communist countries. We still have North Korea. We still have China. We still have Cuba, Vietnam. Persecution goes on in these countries. But what has really changed the game, so to speak, is the emergence of Islamist terrorism, which is what we're seeing in Iraq and Syria. This has made a major difference, and so we're no longer talking about, when it comes to ISIS, for example, promoting religious freedom in a political sense. We've now got a situation of such urgency that we've got to worry about how to deal with people who are literally fending for their lives, not only starving to death and fending with the elements, but are being threatened by people who will kill them because they're Christians or because they're something other than the favored form of Islam that we're seeing. So the answer is it's been there a long time, but I've never seen it quite like this in my lifetime. And I just add this final thing, Brian. The Pope said recently, this is the worst persecution suffered by Christians ever, including in the first century.
So you've also written that the U.S. really has an opportunity here to do something about this. What?
I think the U.S. has two things to do. First, as I say, this isn't a matter of promoting religious freedom now. It's a matter of saving people's lives. And I think that the United States, first of all, the President of the United States has not even spoken out against the persecution of Christians. He has against other groups, and he should, but he needs to speak out about Christians, because these people, there are a couple of 100,000 of them, they're in terrible shape. We need to be considering, in my view, military options from the air that would remove the threat to these Christians. We've got to try to feed them and get them water, but if they're killed by these people, then the other things, the humanitarian assistance, won't make any difference. But in the long run, here's really what we have to do. We should be undermining the conditions under which groups like ISIS arise and other Islamist terrorist groups, or for that matter, Buddhist or other extremist groups that we see in other places in the world. And the way you do that is promote religious freedom. The United States has had for 15, going on 16 years now, a policy of doing that. This administration has, for over half its tenure, had no ambassador at large for international religious freedom.
True.
This person has now been nominated. He's not everything that we Catholics would like, but when
he's a Jewish rabbi.
He's a Jewish rabbi. That's not the point. He's against us on some issues, domestic issues like life. But he will, I am convinced, speak out and act against religious persecution of Christians. And I think that we need to get the Senate to get him into the job as soon as possible in September when they return.
It needs to be a priority. All right, Dr. Thomas Farr, the Director of Religious Freedom Project at Georgetown University. Thank you for your insight tonight.
Thank you, Brian.
And we continue to cover the refugee crisis as we look at news in today's world. The Knights of Columbus have a long history of providing humanitarian relief around the world. Now, moved by concern for Iraqi Christians and other minorities, they're announcing a new response to the Pope's call to support people persecuted in the Middle East. We're joined by Supreme Knight Carl Anderson by satellite from New Haven, Connecticut. Carl, tell us more about the initiative that the Knights have launched to help those who are being persecuted in northern Iraq.
Well, yesterday we established a $1 million fund to help Christian refugees in Iraq. So we're putting $500,000 in immediately, and then we're matching contributions from the public up to another $500,000. But we hope maybe toward the end of this week to get some funds moving into Iraq to help this tragedy that's occurring there.
Do you have a specific plan as to how that money will be channeled?
Well, you know, it's a tremendously complicated situation, as we know, and there are many players involved. Obviously, we want to be working with the Patriarch of Baghdad, Patriarch Seiko, and the other Christian leaders there on the ground. We want to coordinate with the Vatican, what the Holy See will be doing. We also want to be a part of whatever the National Conference of Catholic Bishops decides to do. And of course, there's Catholic Relief Services and other agencies. So we want to be part of what we think over time will become a very coordinated effort. And of course, this is not going to be resolved in a couple of weeks or even a couple of months. This is going to be a long-term situation that's going to need a long-term commitment and determination on the part of millions of Christians around the world to help their brothers and sisters in this terrible tragedy.
And very briefly, how can we help the Knights help?
Well, we have, if you'd like to donate, you can donate online at kfc.org. If you go to our homepage, you'll see a page there set up for the Christian Refugee Relief Fund. And so that would be the quickest way if you like.
Supreme Knight Carl Anderson joining us from New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. We appreciate you and the Knights of Columbus.
Thank you.
And in Denver, Christians and non-Christians alike are coming together to pray for peace in Iraq. Just last night, the Denver Archdiocese hosted an interreligious prayer gathering for Middle East peace. It brought together local and international faith representatives, including Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, Jews, and Muslims. They gathered at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Denver, praying for an end to persecution of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim minorities in the Middle East. The prayer service included readings from the New Testament, the Pentateuch, and the Quran. A federal appeals court is refusing to delay a ruling that strikes down Virginia's gay marriage ban. This means same-sex couples could apply for marriage licenses starting next week. If the Supreme Court does not weigh in, Virginia will also need to start recognizing those unions from out of state by next Wednesday. A Virginia county clerk asked the 4th U.S. District Court of Appeals in Richmond to stay its late July decision, but the request was denied. Some county clerks say they will seek an emergency stay from the High Court as soon as possible. Virginia voters approved a constitutional amendment in 2006 banning so-called same-sex marriage. It also prohibits the recognition of weddings of same-sex couples performed in other states. A leading physician in Sierra Leone's fight against Ebola has died from the disease. The death of Dr. Modupa Cole is a major blow to the country's health system. Trained in the U.S., he was one of the lead doctors at a Freetown isolation ward. His sickness spread fear throughout the hospital. It led to a temporary strike over the weekend. With no available proven treatment for Ebola, the infection of healthcare workers is a top concern as they battle to contain the virus. And one of those who cared for the sick was laid to rest in Madrid today. Father Miguel Pajares was the missionary priest from Spain who contracted the virus while caring for Ebola patients in Liberia. His funeral mass at the Chapel of San Rafael Hospital was attended by family, friends, and the Spanish health minister. The hospital is owned and run by Father Pajares' religious order, San Juan de Dios. Ebola has killed more than 1,000 people in West Africa, especially in Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and now Nigeria. Coming up, playing sports should be fun, not dangerous for kids. Wyatt Goolsby reports on ways to stay safe on the field. And she co-starred with Bogart in the 1940s. They were married until he died. We look back at Lauren Bacall's life. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly on Wednesday, August 13th. And as students return to school and youth sports programs gear up, a new report claims that more needs to be done to protect young athletes from injury. Wyatt Goolsby takes a closer look at the findings.
Brian, for parents, coaches, and young athletes, it's an exciting time of the year, but as you know, sports can also get pretty competitive, so it's why some groups are sending out a warning about the risk of injuries. When you think of fall sports, the hard hits and daily drills probably come to mind, but what you may not realize is that every day, thousands of children across the U.S. sustain an injury, and in many cases, serious enough to go to the ER.
I think it's disturbing that the culture of sports is allowing kids to think that hitting an opponent late or hitting them extra hard to send a message is the right thing to do. That's something I think we can change.
Kate Carr with Safe Kids Worldwide says sports are good for children, but a new survey by the group gives reason to be cautious on the field, showing that 54% of players pushed through injuries and 42% downplayed the pain. 53% of coaches say they feel pressure from parents to keep their kid playing even after an injury, and almost 30% of players give hard hits to opponents.
A lot of kids like to hide their injuries or downplay them so they can stay in the game. Yet that young athlete might be putting themselves at risk for something even more serious.
Carr says communication between players, coaches, and parents is critical. Ray McKenna with Catholic Athletes for Christ says humility and honesty are also key.
That following the example of Christ as laid out through the gospel and the Beatitudes is the proper way to approach all of life, including your sporting life. And for any athlete, what we encourage them to is to have a good relationship, an opening, trusting relationship with their coach or coaches.
The Safe Kids report also says one of the main problems are re-injuries or repetitive injuries. It's why they're advising young athletes to drink lots of water and also stick with regularly scheduled breaks. Brian?
All right, Wyatt, thank you. Well, the look, the low, throaty voice, the award-winning Broadway career, all trademarks of the late actress Lauren Bacall.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.
Bacall was more than a movie legend. She was from Hollywood's golden era, the wife of actor Humphrey Bogart. They made several movies together and stayed married until he died in 1957. It was on Broadway, though, where Bacall achieved her most critical acclaim. She spent nearly 20 years on the stage, earning 2 Tony Awards. In her later years, her film career saw a renaissance. She acted into her 80s. Lauren Bacall was 89 when she died yesterday in New York. Broadway honors one of the many talents that made Robin Williams a legendary entertainer. Williams is known for his TV and movie work, but he also performed on stage for U.S. troops and in Broadway shows. The marquee lights around Times Square will dim tonight, honoring the actor-comedian who died at his Northern California home on Monday. His Broadway appearances include a 2002 one-man show called Robin Williams Live on Broadway. Up next, a young man survives 26 hours in the rubble of a collapsed building in Thailand. And a wall of water takes a Nebraska hospital cafeteria by storm. On this Wednesday evening, thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and the UN says the number of people killed in eastern Ukraine appears to have doubled in the last 2 weeks alone. The UN Human Rights Office says conservative estimates show the death toll rising to more than 2,000 people. On average, more than 60 people a day are killed or wounded in what the UN calls an escalating trend of violence. The totals include Ukrainian armed forces, civilians, and rebel armed groups. In the last week, Ukrainian government forces have been closing in on the remaining rebel strongholds. A man is rescued after being trapped in a collapsed building in Thailand for more than 26 hours. Crews cheered as he was pulled from the rubble and placed on a stretcher. The 24-year-old was inside the 6-story building when it collapsed Tuesday night. Sadly, several others did not survive. Dozens were hospitalized after the collapse. An arrest order has been issued for the building's owners and engineers. Another incredible scene. This is Good Samaritan Hospital in Kearney, Nebraska. Watch now as floodwaters burst through a window of the cafeteria on Saturday. Administrators say heavy rains in the area backed up sewer drains and sent 9 feet of water into the hospital. Fortunately, no one was hurt and the water did not reach any of the patient areas. Finally, tonight we return briefly to our top story. Pope Francis is on his way to South Korea tonight. This is the first papal visit to Korea in 24 years. Francis is following closely in the footsteps of his recent predecessors who have chalked up many international papal trips. Let's talk about papal travel with Dr. Matthew Bunson, a senior fellow at the St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology and a leading papal historian. In fact, you wrote the first English biography of Pope Francis.
I did.
And the newest book, The Encyclopedia of Saints. I call him our walking encyclopedia because he's written several of them. So let's go back to Paul VI, who was really the first traveling pope.
He was. What's so interesting when we look at the modern papacy, it's almost unfathomable that popes don't travel. And yet, if you go back to 1964, we have in Paul VI, the first pope who had even left Italy for the first time in a century. He was the first pope on an airplane. Since then, the modern papacy makes travel one of the centerpieces of its universal mission to the world.
John Paul really gave that.
He did. 104 different trips.
Yes.
Benedict XVI had 24.
In a 4-year period.
Exactly. And yet, we can't also underestimate the importance of these trips for Catholics all over the world. You know, John Paul, as we said, made 104 trips. He was seen in person by over 1 billion people.
And the Pope is a pastor of all these.
He is.
All these Catholics. But he's also a world leader, and I think Francis really gets that. Let's just talk a little bit about the strategy that he's used in his travels.
Right. Well, Francis is not a young man. He's very aware of conserving his energies and is very strategic in where he's going. Of course, he was committed to go to World Youth Day in Brazil. Now he's going to, of course, Korea. But if we look at his other trips, we see him going to the Holy Land, which is something of great importance to him. But this trip to Korea is just the start for him. He's going to Sri Lanka, he's going to the Philippines. So he's making a strategic determination that he wants to focus much of his pontificate on Asia. But then there's this other added twist, and that is that he's very conscious of his role as a pastor in Italy. So he's been making a lot of trips within Italy itself.
We've been following those, yeah.
To Molise, he went to Lampedusa to stand up as a world leader. What was he doing there? He was talking about the world immigration issue. So he's very tactical, but he's also very strategic, and he's very shrewd in husbanding his energies, but making the most of these individual trips.
Will he come to America?
I think the expectations are that he will. He's very keen on the Synod on the Family that's coming up.
In Philadelphia.
It's the extraordinary one.
Yep.
And then he's got the Meeting of Families in Philadelphia, and then he has another Synod on the Family. It's a perfect sort of triptych for him to advance what he sees as a very important issue of the role of the family in the modern world.
Right, our papal expert, Dr. Matthew Bunson on papal travel. Thanks for joining us, Matthew.
Privilege to be with you.
Our coverage continues tomorrow night. Until then, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on YouTube. For EWTN News Nightly, our entire team here and in Korea, thanks for watching. Good night, and may God bless you.